Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tending to Change. I'm your host, Jenny Juarez. So, last week I shared with you my understanding of what it means to have an experience of awakening or a spiritual awakening or waking up to life. This week I would like to talk about how that experience of awakening creates a sense of longing. It's a longing to return to that state of expansion. This marks the beginning of our spiritual path. This path is a journey inward. It's a reconnection to the part of us that is one with the all, the grand totality of life. It includes manifested reality and the infinite potential. It's the form and the formless. It's called many things across cultures and faith traditions, but whatever imagery or words are used to describe it, it will always fall short because it's beyond the thinking mind. It's beyond our thoughts or what we can grasp or understand or conceptualize about it. It's primordial love, the love that creates, sustains, and dissolves all. It is the whole. We can't think about it. We can only be it by direct experience. And once we experience that direct revelation, our whole conceptual framework of life and what's important gets tossed on its head. Because in the deepest parts of our hearts, it feels like home. And now that it's been revealed to us, we intuitively understand that nothing else but returning to that unified state of awareness is ever going to be enough. Of course, we'll try like hell, but no high from acquiring material possessions or momentary pleasure will ever last long enough to satisfy us because we have woken up from our confusion and our sleepwalk through life. We have had a taste of true freedom. But then comes the stumbling. This is the burning away of confusion and delusion and all the things that obscure our consciousness and prevent us from returning to this state. So even though we're on a spiritual journey, it actually just becomes our life's journey, but now with a new purpose and meaning. It can actually surprise us how simple the path really is, even though it may not be easy. I am definitely not excluded from this, but so many people fall into a false belief that the goal of enlightenment or awakening is to get and stay high. It can become an obsession of bliss, making the inevitable trials and tribulations of life, along with all the accompanying emotions, feel like a failure. But what I've come to understand through my own experience is that the spiritual journey is much more about mental and emotional maturation. It's about taking care of our physical, mental, and emotional life in a way that creates space. It creates the space for the ever-present spirit, this unfathomable love, to permeate our being and infuse our lives with just astounding beauty and awe right in the midst of everyday life. So I'd like to take some time to share with you a bit about the beginning of my own spiritual journey, the year between my grandma's death and the start of yoga teacher training. So after my grandma died, the grief I felt made it hard for me to stay connected to the other joys and sense of meaning in my life. My perspective became blurred and confused, and it was as if I had been cut off from the steady stream of warmth and love and care that had flowed through my grandma. It was a meditation led by my mother that helped shake me out of this mindset into something more expansive. I remember one day my mom coming to check on me, and I'm in my bedroom, sitting in my rocking chair, just crying, just bereft of grief. And she asked me what was going on. And I told her, I just miss my grandma so much. I want to hug her and hold her and feel her cheek on my face and hear her voice just one more time. And my mom looked at me and she said, Jenny, She's always here with you. You can talk to her anytime you want. My mom encouraged me to close my eyes and just breathe, and she started to guide me into a meditation. And I went into this kind of trance state. And I saw myself in the woods behind my grandparents' house where I had played so much as a child. And I was at the top of the hill where I could see so much greenery and forest in front of me. And beyond that, the buildings downtown and the houses of the neighborhood. And I was sitting on this fallen tree next to my grandmother. I was faced straight ahead, not looking at her, but I could feel her arm touching mine. And I began to cry, and I said, Grandma, I just miss you. I just wish I could feel you and see you and talk to you again. And my grandmother told me in this trance, Jenny, anytime you miss me, all you need to do is go hug your children. Go hug Paulo. My love exists within them, and every time you are hugging them, you're hugging me. I came out of that meditation and was just rearranged. I went downstairs and my girls saw my tear-soaked face and they were worried about me. And I said, it's okay, it's okay. I'm just grieving. I just really miss great grandma. But I just had a vision of her. And do you know what she told me? She told me that whenever I'm missing her, that all I need to do is hug you girls and your daddy, and I will be hugging my grandma. With this new perspective, I felt like I had a choice again. I accepted that no one was coming to save me. It was time to love myself the way that she always had, thoroughly and unconditionally. This would be my way of honoring her. This insight was only further solidified after reading an article while I was on a lunch break at work. It was about some guy who had experienced corporate burnout, quit his job, followed his passion, and was now living his best life. But the quote that really stuck out for me from his interview was, if you want to change your life, it's very likely that you're going to have to change your life. The ridiculous obviousness of it made me laugh. But it also felt a little like a punch to the gut. I was not happy with my life in that moment. While I had recently gotten a promotion at my job that I had been trying for over 5 years, the relocation had me commuting over an hour a day on top of my 8 to 9 hour shifts. I still didn't see my kids or Paulo very often, and my stress levels were through the roof, and I had precious little free time. I was exhausted and yet frantic and heading quickly toward burnout. It became clear to me that the goals and career aspirations that had been guiding me for the past 13 years were no longer taking me in the direction that I wanted to go. And if I wanted to change my life, it was very likely that I was going to have to change my life. So, in keeping with my commitment to honor my grandmother, I slowly began to transform my daily habits. It started with my diet. I had recently discovered a whole foods diet aimed at reducing systemic inflammation, and while I had lost my momentum in my grief, I reclaimed that self-discipline and started it back up. It was no sugar, no alcohol, no refined grains or processed food. This nutritional switch gave me back my energy, and it gave me more clarity in my mind, and it strengthened my capacity for inward attention and focus. It didn't take long for other shifts to unfold. I told my friends that I was making it a game to see how many ways I could love myself in a day. Things like drinking water, exercising, going outside, and prioritizing rest. It was a total reframe of self-care from harsh and even abusive tactics of changing myself to instead just like taking good care of myself with kindness and respect. And it was this mindset that led me to chiropractic care and body work, and eventually that first yoga class that I mentioned in a previous episode. I started journaling and writing poetry again, which felt like a beautiful homecoming from my early teenage years. The summer after my grandma died, I had a pivotal conversation with one of Paulo's high school friends after we went to a mutual friend's wedding one evening. Brandon used to work at a seafood restaurant with Paulo, but by then he had moved out to California and started a graphic design business and was a young millionaire traveling the world and experiencing things he never imagined could be possible. As we enjoyed wine and cheese and desserts, I asked Brandon, how did he do it? How did he break out of society's expectations and instead create the life of his wildest dreams? He answered with a book title, The 4-Hour Workweek by Timothy Ferriss. I mentally filed his advice and checked the book out later. Now, I just want to say that Brandon tragically died in a helicopter accident about 5 years later. And he was such a lovely, joyful person, and he left such a meaningful impression on me and so many others. And I have deep gratitude for the example he set and for the inspiration he sparked in me that night. A while later, I ended up picking up that book, and I did a thought experiment in which the author instructs the reader to define their nightmare in the event that they pursue their vision and something goes horribly wrong. He then asks a follow-up question. Would these difficulties be permanent? And if not, how could you get things back under control temporarily? This was such an impactful exercise. It made me realize that imagining different possibilities for my future was not so scary after all. It showed me that I didn't have to only follow the safe, pre-prescribed path of success. It invited me to dare to take risks, try new things, and be willing to fail and pick myself back up. This was a huge shift in my previously risk-averse, anxious perspective. So when Paulo and I talked about how to celebrate our upcoming anniversary, we decided to venture outside our typical hotel room and bar hopping, food-focused vacation, and instead take a trip to northern Michigan. For 6 days, we hiked around Tequamanon Falls, pictured Rocks National Park, and enjoyed the sunset on Lake Superior. And we finished up with a winery tour in Traverse City. I have to be honest though, it took me like the first full day and a half to settle my nervous system down and switch from doing to being mode. But by the time we started the 6-mile hike around Pictured Rocks, the energy around us started to shift. We were walking more slowly, more gently, and we would go from laughing and being silly to just walking together in silence. It felt amazing to move our bodies and take in the fresh air and the sunshine, and not to mention the exquisite beauty of northern Michigan. We were shocked and actually delighted to discover that we're outdoorsy people. And I know that might sound a little silly, but for the 10 years that we had been together before this vacation, we had never really done anything like this before. This totally broadened our ideas of fun and enjoyment beyond just going to clubs and bars with friends. At the end of summer, we took a trip with our daughters and nephew to visit my mom in Florida. She had moved there a few months after my grandmother's death and was living in my grandma's house with my uncles. Now, this was the second time in my life that my mom had moved to Florida, and honestly, it reopened some deep abandonment wounds in me. The sadness and grief that surfaced was keeping me just uncomfortable enough to stay awake during this unfolding journey. So while we were sitting outside under the stars, lost in conversation one night, my mom handed me a book that she had tried showing me once before. The first time I was not interested and I had told her no thank you. But this time was different. I was curious about why she wanted me to read it, so I decided to give it a try. I devoured the first chapter that night, and I actually ended up buying my own copy once we got back home so I could read it slowly and integrate the wisdom that was just resonating so strongly to me. The book was called Everyday Enlightenment by Dan Millman. And there was a quote in that book that really stood out to me and felt so serendipitous to that article in the break room. Dan says, life continually returns us to the inescapable reality that the best way to do what you need to do is just to do it. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's tough, but that doesn't change the fact that the only way to get something done is to do it. Again, super simple, straightforward advice, and yet for some reason it was hitting me on such a deep level. So we got back home, jumped into the new school year with the girls, and after finishing my 10 class pass at the yoga studio, I was in the best physical health of my life. But the problem is my mind was still whirling with anxiety. Every morning I would wake up with a panic attack. Before I even got out of bed, I was worrying about what I had to accomplish that day, whether I would have enough time, whether I would use my time correctly, and it was just overwhelming. I longed for freedom from this. I wanted to create a new storyline for myself and my family. I wanted long days like the ones we had on our trip up north. I wanted a calm mind and a sense of curiosity about the future instead of dread. But my mental health only got worse as we began to creep toward the death anniversaries of my grandfather in November and my grandmother's in December and January. The grief started to resurface and my energy waned. I started drinking more and I slowly let go of my routines. I even stopped practicing yoga and exercising. But there was something different this time. I was able to witness it all happening, and the witnessing awareness didn't judge. I started to feel compassion for myself and acknowledge how hard making all these changes actually was. I began to offer myself forgiveness and acknowledge that, I'm going to need to take a much longer view of this path toward embodying self-love in honor of my grandma. You can't undo a whole lifetime of mental habits and self-degradation with the snap of a finger. So I was going to be walking this razor's edge between accepting who I was exactly as I was, while simultaneously stretching beyond myself toward a transformed version of me. And there's a beautiful quote from an unknown source that says, "When the student is ready, the teacher appears." That January, I began looking up yoga studios that offered yoga teacher training programs, and I visited 2 studios. The first one seemed like it was going to be right up my alley. There was going to be book reports and other studious requirements that made my type A personality just totally thrilled. But when I went to a class, I was completely disappointed. It was not the right fit. I didn't think the second studio was going to work out for me either. I had read on the webpage that the teachers practiced bhakti yoga, which was the yogic path of devotion or service to God. And while I grew up going to Catholic schools and attending church on Sunday, during my parents' divorce, I really felt like I had been abandoned by God. And that is when my independent, over-efforting self really started to emerge. And I did not want God in my yoga. Much to my surprise, however, as soon as I entered the space at From the Heart Yoga and Tai Chi Center, I knew I was right where I was supposed to be. I don't know why, but it felt like home. The space was beautifully adorned. There were peacock feathers and paintings and statues of Hindu deities. And after my first class with Benji, I knew this was where I wanted to do my training. So I attended an information session about the 200-hour teacher training program. But afterward, I realized that affording this program was going to be super difficult. And after a lot of thought and going back and forth and conversations with Paulo and one of my close friends, I decided to face my fears, humble myself, and create a GoFundMe campaign. I wrote about my journey since my grandma's death and how deeply I felt that this was my next step in life. The encouragement I received was amazing. I had always preferred to be in the position of giver instead of receiver because it's so uncomfortable being vulnerable in that way. But this experience was life-giving. My campaign was shared 122 times, And thanks to the generosity of my family and my friends and even some strangers, I raised a third of the cost of tuition. What an exciting time that was. It continues to amaze me how much our lives can change over the course of a year. It all depends on our willingness to actually do something different. Whether that's adopting a new habit or letting go of an old one, meeting new people, or trying a new activity, or some combination of all of that. The more we're willing to step out of our comfort zone, the greater the opportunity to expand and transform ourselves, our lives, and the world around us. It takes courage to do this, but the capacity lies within each and every one of us. The question is, are you willing to change your life in order to change your life? So let's finish today with just a simple awareness of breath practice. Taking a dignified and comfortable seat on the floor or in a chair, hands lightly resting on the thighs. Begin to tone the belly, moving the ribs back toward the spine until the back body expands with breath. And then lengthening the spine in both directions as you root down through the sitting bones and lengthen through the neck and crown of the head. Gently closing the eyes if you haven't already. Begin to breathe in and out the nose. As you inhale, feel the chest expand with breath as the shoulders lift up gently, pulling the diaphragm muscle up in the tummy. And as you exhale, feel the belly soften, the shoulders release. Continue this one breath after the other. Turning your awareness inward, I'd like to invite you to notice, where do you feel the breath most readily? Perhaps it's at the nostrils, as you feel the cool air come in through the nostrils, the warm breath leaving with the exhale. Or maybe you feel the breath more readily at the chest and shoulders, with each rising and falling. Perhaps you feel the breath more readily in the belly, as you feel the body expand on all sides with the inhale, and then soften and relax with the exhale. Experiment with these 3 locations: the nostrils, the chest and shoulders, the belly. Where is the breath most apparent to you? Maintain your attention on that space. Feeling the breath come in and out for 3 or 5 more rounds of breath. And when you're ready, open the eyes, lifting the gaze. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to these episodes, and I hope that they're offering some kind of benefit to you. I look forward to continuing the conversation again next week. Take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.